Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben is a pioneer in the world of metabolic health. He holds dual PhDs and a ton of other credentials, and has been involved on both the science and clinical sides, as well as real world training, and has worked with Hollywood people, pro athletes, and he's an amazing guy. Just inducted into the Fitness Hall of Fame, if I'm not mistaken.
Fitness Hall of Fame, yeah.
Yeah, so big congratulations for that. So this, I wanted to we were just talking and getting ready for our podcast, and we decided, let's go ahead and record, because he's got so much wisdom to share that, and Dr. Ben has his own program of metabolic exercise. And I think it's something that will really revolutionize and help so many people, because I think so many people, Dr. Ben, I'm sure you've seen this, they think you need to exercise for hours and hours and hours, and then you should eat less and exercise more, and it never works. So how does your system work?
The history of that philosophy and the application is evident. It doesn't work because it's the wrong prescription. In the beginning of my book, I say I write this book because I've seen usually women jogging, and it looks like they're working really hard and not having a really good time. They're overweight, and I know they went to their doctor and he said, I want you to do more exercise, I want you to cut down on fats, and they're trying like hell to do what he says. It's the wrong prescription, okay? It doesn't work. So they get discouraged and they say, exercise and diet doesn't work, I'm gonna give up. I see that and it breaks my heart, only because they're wasting energy, they're wasting time. It's the wrong prescription. It's giving them a drug for hemorrhoids and they've got a sore elbow. I mean, you know, which goes to the expression, he doesn't know his ass from his elbow. So that's, you know, basically my thought. If given the right information, I think these plans not only can work, they do work. And for 50 years, I've seen it work across the board universally. And now more than ever, we need productive, efficient, safe behaviors to apply to, you know, combat this metabolic disease. You want to talk about a pandemic, talk about metabolic disease.
Yeah. How did we get to this point? If we look back at just the rates of diabetes and the rates of obesity back in 1970 until now, and it's, you know, it's amazing how, and sad, how many people are suffering from this. Something that would you say that we could reverse a lot of this?
Sure. I mean, you don't catch diabetes, you don't catch obesity. These are not, you know, contagious diseases. They are behavioral disorders, okay? And therefore the logical solution is behavioral. The two most powerful behaviors that we can apply are diet and exercise. I mean, it's that simple. So yeah, can they be reversed? I mean, you look at Dr. Finney's stuff, the studies they're doing, and they are reversing type 2 diabetes in 80% of the population in 6 months through low carb keto diets and some, you know, specifically applied exercise. So, you know, basically it can be done. It is being done. There are random controlled studies now that are being done and presented that show that it can be done. Okay, there isn't any question that it can be done, because it's not a genetic disorder in most of the cases. It is absolutely behavioral. So when we went, and listen, literature for years reinforced the fact that, you know, fat was to be demonized, saturated fat certainly. And I, you know, having studied this stuff, having reviewed thousands of studies, not reviewed, but read and analyzed thousands of studies and read thousands more, you know, it was almost indisputable. I said, how can this be? I'm not observing this in my population, in my people, but all the literature says that it's so. Well, we know now that the literature was skewed, it was biased, and it was really inconclusive. In fact, it was so, what we call equivocal, it was so wacky that the interpretation could be almost considered fraudulent. That's where we got, and that's where the American Heart Association, American Dietetic Association, you know, jumped on the bandwagon. Of course, the government, which is basically, you know, has the collective IQ of a 2-year-old. But this is what happened. And it was obviously that something was different. Something was going wrong. And what was going wrong was people were eating too much sugar, too much energy, but mostly in the form of sugar. And the easiest way to address that, in my mind, is to reduce the sugar, the carbohydrate. Although, if you listen to Dr. Ted Naiman, okay, who I really like as far as his, I don't know if you know Ted.
Yeah. He's up in Seattle.
He has a protein to energy ratio that he talks about. He talks about energy toxicity as opposed to just simply, you know, too many carbs. But in most cases, in my experience, if we can reduce carbs, then we can address this most readily and most palatably, because if we reduce carbs, we reduce the trigger to the opiate centers in the brain, because we know carbohydrates are 5 times more addictive than cocaine. And, you know, so it goes, there's a bunch of facets to this thing. But if people want to be vegans and eat whole foods, they can do it. Okay, I just think it's more difficult behaviorally. And I think there are some limitations that have to be addressed with supplements on a vegan kind of diet. But yeah, I'm a low carb guy, have been for years. And I learned that from the leanest people in the world, because I trained with bodybuilders as a kid. And I said, hell, I have never seen people any leaner than this. And what did they do? They ate protein and a little bit of fat and a little bit of carb, but, you know, and they were lean and healthy. And that's when I started to read about this stuff. And as a result, my best results ever in the world, in my history, for reducing fat were protein sparing modified fasts. Now we know they have some complications, but I was leaning that way and have been for years, including fasting. Like I said, my first fasting article that I presented and published was in 1978. Okay, and high intensity training I've been doing formally and in studies and in clinical, you know, work since 1974. So this stuff is not new. The science doesn't change. Our interpretation of the science changes, but there's so much more information upon which to base a really, you know, a logical and safe application of behavior.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. You mentioned the protein sparing fast. I know there's a lot of people that are interested in fasting. They're interested in low carb and in keto. And then we have other people who are probably new to this and they still think it's crazy, and they are thinking we're nuts. And so can you tell us a little bit about any guidelines for the protein sparing fast?
Well, the protein sparing fast, and I don't advocate it absolutely, but I mean, the first one that was real popular was called OptiFast, and Oprah Winfrey lost, you know, 100 or whatever she lost.
I remember that one. I was involved with that in the early.
So was I. I mean, I developed for Sandoz, was the company that manufactured that, and that was called OptiFast, and I developed an exercise program that I cleverly called OptiFit. So in other words, we wanted to do exercise with this thing. And I worked.
Can't believe it. I was the guy. I was doing the fitness lectures for that at a hospital-based wellness center near Memphis, Tennessee, back in 1990.
Yeah, no, I was doing it in the 80s with OptiFit. Anyway, the point was these people were morbidly obese, and the downside of protein sparing modified fast is you ingest protein. It was a very low calorie diet. I would call it a semi-starvation diet, and just protein. So we would try to reduce the protein utilization as energy, so you wouldn't waste away, basically, and so the resting metabolic rate wouldn't go to the sink, because we know when you don't eat enough, you go into this starvation mode and you start to use protein as energy. You lose muscle. When you lose muscle, resting metabolic rate decreases. When resting metabolic rate decreases, you can eat 700 calories a day and still gain weight if you're hormonally screwed up, which many people that get to that level of obesity are. So in any case, that's what, but I don't recommend that as my number one option. Can you do it? In my opinion, I haven't seen really many problems. If there are some heart complications and then we start to get into mineral deficiencies and imbalances, that's when it has to be done. That's why those things were done under medical supervision, and I still think they probably should. So that's my read on that stuff, Dave.
So what would be your go-to for someone who's coming to you who's not done anything other than moderate activity and trying to control their caloric intake? Maybe they're, you know, the idea that they want to get started with the low-hanging fruit. They don't want to change everything. They want to change a few simple things. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm a minimalist. So what's the least intrusive behavioral pattern I can apply to get the most bang for my buck. You know, Ivor Cummins speaks about the Pareto principle, which we all know basically defined is 20% of what you do gets you 80% of your benefit. So I try to go there. So what you want to do, most people probably have insulin resistance, which means they've been exposed to high levels of sugar intake, and insulin is the hormone that responds to sugar, so it has to regulate it in your blood sugar. And so what happens is, as we become more and more inured or resistant to insulin, we need more of it to drive energy into the cells, primarily into the muscles. So the first thing you can do is to try to diminish the secretion of insulin. Okay, how do you do that most readily? You decrease the sugar, carbohydrates. And that's a definition that people are not that aware of. Carbohydrates, what spikes my blood sugar more than birthday cake or brownies, which I don't eat, but is white rice. Okay, sure. So understand what a carbohydrate is, and somehow intelligent people have a problem when we say sugar. They don't understand that carbohydrates really are sugars put together in a package. So cereal. So if you have frosted wheats, frosted mini wheats, okay, or Tony the Tiger tells your kids it's great, well, really sugar on sugar. So sure. It's nasty. I mean, it raises the response. And when you're young, it doesn't make that much obvious difference. But for example, fasting insulin levels will indicate about 10 years before the manifestation of high blood sugar that you have a problem with metabolic handling of that food source, of the carbohydrate, okay? So and that's something, for example, doctors should be cognizant of, and they're not. Measure fasting insulin. It'll tell us way before we have sugar problems, okay? Because diabetes is just a proxy for insulin resistance, okay? It's something that happens after you become insulin resistant by a decade. So for example, so what do I tell people? Cut your carbohydrates if you can, okay? And not just cut them. For all these behaviors, there are thresholds. What is a threshold? It's the point at which when you do a behavior, something irrevocable and irreversible happens. It's the level at which we want to work in our exercise and which we want to apply in our diet. What's the threshold? For most people, under 40 grams of carbohydrate, which when you start to analyze, it seems incredibly drastic, but really that's the threshold that most people see the biggest bang for their buck. And it's kind of like Dr. Atkins said, he had a lot of the science right, but people didn't like the messenger, okay? Yeah. But he had a lot of the science right. And so people say, well, I tried Atkins, I lost weight, and then I went off it and I gained weight. Well, that's like saying, I tried this medicine, okay, and my rash went away, but I stopped it after 3 days and my rash came back. Well, you're not taking the medicine anymore. So that's, to me, that's
great analogy.
Yeah, it manifests ignorance. Okay, let's not be ignorant about this stuff. So you have to take this medicine, and okay, well, can I never ever have a piece of pizza or a piece of cake? No, that's ridiculous. Okay, but what you can have are nuts and fish and eggs and poultry and cheese and avocados, and I mean, you can start to make up some. I can make you a Cobb salad, okay, that will just satisfy every taste urge that you had, and it's plenty healthy and it's low carb. So does it take effort? Does it take organization? Yes, it does. In my opinion, the most prominent feature of a successful diet is organization. I know what I'm going to eat tomorrow. I know what I'm going to eat if I go to that restaurant. I know what I'm going to eat if there's a party, okay? Be organized, be ready, okay? And not to push my book because I make I think $2 a copy, but I have all of this in my book because the reason I wrote the book is because people have asked me these questions for decades. And I said, well, I don't write the answers down so I don't have to repeat it more than 200 or 300 times a day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, well, let's pivot and change gears and talk about your book a little bit. And I guess is it on Amazon?
Yeah, it's Amazon. It's 15 minutes to fitness. And the publishers thought that was catchy. A lot of people like the 15-minute thing. But in reality, 15 minutes is what my average workout for all of my patients and clients, including myself, do of high intensity work twice a week. And I explain why that is so and why we've gotten the results that we've gotten for successfully through every population for the last 50 years, Because it's good science, okay? It's good science, and if you apply it properly, you'll get the biggest bang for your buck. And in addition to the 15 minutes twice a week, I want you to be active, but activity is separate and distinct from exercise. Exercise is formal, it's structured, it's organized, okay? Activity is not being sedentary, because as we know, you can exercise and still be sedentary.
Sure.
If you and I do an exercise protocol a couple, 3 times a week, that's great for exercise. If we sit on our butts 8 hours a day, we are still sedentary and subject to the cardiac and diabetic risk of being sedentary. So to offset sedentary behavior, we're active, we walk, we stretch, we play golf, we hike, okay, that's fine. Not absolutely mandatory critically every day for a certain number of hours, but suggested and very heavily suggested, the high intensity exercise is necessary and mandatory.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about cardiovascular training? I get that when you're doing your program, you're probably getting a dual effect. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Working the muscle as well as working the cardiovascular system?
If we understand the term aerobic and what aerobic metabolism is, which is supposed to be good for your heart, and certainly it is, then the work that we do with the S.Ma.R.T system, with this high intensity, is more aerobic than any aerobic workout that you can do, okay? So that gets a little bit into the weeds as far as technically,
Sure.
But long story short, you cannot be more aerobically active than when you are recovering from anaerobic activity. Okay, repeat that. After high intensity exercise, the recovery is almost purely aerobic if we measure what we call the respiratory quotient. Again, not to get into the weeds, but when we measure what is purely aerobic or how aerobic something is, that respiratory quotient that goes to the purely aerobic is only manifested after recovery from high intensity anaerobic exercise. Yeah,
that's amazing. And then to look at cognitive function, I know we've got a lot of professionals out there that are both in the healthcare as well as just executives and things like that who would be very interested. Anything they can naturally do to have better cognitive function. And I think the term, and I may be butchering this, is brain-derived neurotropic.
Yeah, BNDF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. Yeah. Okay. So think about this on an evolutionary basis. Okay. When does your mind have to be as sharp as possible? Okay. When do these neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, dopamine, have to be peaked? When we are in danger, when we are fleeing, or when we're trying to attack and capture food. Okay. That is when the muscle system is demanding high level response.
Okay.
So the brain produces those neurotransmitters at the highest rates during exercise. So there's no question. The best book I've ever read about this is called S.Ma.R.T by Dr. John Ratay, R-A-T-A-Y. And he talks about aerobic exercise. And the reason John does that, he's a psychiatrist, and most of the studies that have been done have been on aerobic exercise. However, most people, including well-schooled MDs and exercise physiologists, don't realize that the type of aerobic benefit and the metabolic pathways they're trying to instigate are best instigated by taxing all of the muscle fibers, which means high intensity training. Okay, so we can duplicate in spades the benefit, the brain benefit, BNDF, neurotropic factors, any of these growth factors, norepinephrine, dopamine are enhanced. Those are neurotransmitters, which basically makes your brain sharper, work at a higher level, and they diminish with age or with certain diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and things like that. So yeah, exercise in the brain is like, I do lectures just on that topic. And so,
yeah, well, I can see you got it down pat, and I think we all need to keep our brain health. And with the explosion in Alzheimer's and dementia, could we cover a little bit of that as far as for those that like me that have a family member with Alzheimer's that's on my radar? So
yeah.
Along with the high intensity exercise, the low carb eating. I used to be low fat, and I feel a lot better low carb. And anything else you would suggest as far as prevention of?
Okay, well, let's go to the diet. Okay, We know that what we call amyloid plaque is one of the problems and complications in Alzheimer's. Amyloid is just the name of the protein, and it forms plaque if it accumulates. Well, there are, what is the name of that now? Insulin degrading enzyme. It's called IDE, okay? The main role of that is to metabolize insulin. However, IDE's secondary function is to metabolize and take and reduce, okay, amyloid protein. If we are constantly fighting a high level of insulin, this IDE, insulin degrading enzyme, has no leftover time or power to degrade amyloid plaque. Okay. So if we can take the load off that IDE by reducing insulin response, insulin levels, we can better attack and metabolize the amyloid plaque. And that comes from high intensity exercise, or any exercise, but high intensity does it again in a magnified kind of a way.
Excellent. And if you coupled high intensity exercise with some fasting, is there any evidence?
Anything that's going to reduce the need for insulin secretion. Intermittent fasting, which in the old days, when it wasn't so scientific, we called eating once a day, yeah. and low carb. In other words, whatever induces the down regulation or reduces insulin secretion will certainly help in rearranging, reversing, preventing some of these complications.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic stuff. So there's just a plethora of benefits from our head to our toes for doing this much simpler program that you're advocating. It takes less time, it's safer, it's sustainable, and it allows you to get on with your life and still do other things, which is, as we all know, the number one excuse everyone makes is, oh, I don't have time, right? I don't have time to exercise. I don't have time to eat right. So when I'm coaching people, I'm always suggesting this too, that this exactly what you're saying.
There are 3 reasons why people don't exercise. Don't have enough time, afraid I'm going to get hurt, don't see benefits.
That's great.
You don't have 15 minutes twice a week, I can't help you. No one has gotten hurt doing this slow resistance training, the S.Ma.R.T training. I'm talking Navy SEALs, world-class athletes, sedentary people, rehab patients, and most people, honest to goodness, see a physical difference in 3 or 4 workouts, which is basically about an hour total time in 2 weeks, because it's powerful medicine. Okay, this stuff really works. So I think we've answered all those questions, and that's why our retention rate is huge. I've got people doing this program for over 40 years, and I have thousands that have been doing it for over 20. So obviously it's sustainable. It's behaviorally palatable. Okay, you can do it. Does it take organization? Does it take effort? Absolutely it does. But again, getting the biggest bang for your buck, in my opinion, is something that everybody wants at every level. And that's what we're trying to do. So putting together the high intensity exercise a couple times a week, because there is this recovery issue, is more better? No, it is not. Okay, be active and do your high intensity exercise, and then cut down on something of the things that cause what we call energy toxicity, or the inability to store energy in a healthy manner. And that's usually cutting down on carbohydrates, but also you can't eat, I don't go with the people that say, you can eat as much fat as you want. No, not really, not if you're a big eater. You can't, because that energy has to be stored somehow, and the liver can't handle all of it. And the same basic concept will happen if we eat too much carb or too much fat. The worst combination on the planet is high fat, high carb.
High carb, yes.
That's a surefire way to have a catastrophe happen in a very short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, before we started recording today, we were chatting, and you had an amazing, a simple but powerful analogy for as you've seen over the years that a lot of intelligent people with advanced degrees think that complex carbohydrates are somehow safe, and they're not. It's not sugar. I don't eat any sugar, but this is the way. And I used to think this way too. And I studied I have a degree in health science, and I used to think the same thing. It was like, oh, it's a complex carb. It's going to break down slowly. And so I'm okay eating a big plate of pasta and eating a big serving of rice every day, and et cetera, and the sports drinks and all this stuff. And luckily, I got my insulin tested and was able to get some good counsel and change my planning. But can you tell us about that analogy of of looking at sugar and looking at complex carbs and how they and the connection?
Well, if that's the simple connection you're looking for, I mean, complex carbs do break down less readily and therefore spike insulin less severely. But in the long run, you still have to metabolize the complex carb, which has to break down into glucose, into sugar. Okay, so it's not without problems. Okay, and again, for example, if you have ingested on a regular basis too much energy, okay, and again, complex carb and fat have a lot of energy. So that's true, but fat have a higher satiety. In other words, you get more full eating fat, so there's an advantage. And fat doesn't trigger the opiate receptors in your brain that carbohydrates do. So behaviorally, it's much more readily manageable. Okay, but so the complex carbohydrate, again, that's the whole thing. Well, bread, and or whole wheat bread, all these other things, they're fine, and they're less refined than absolutely highly refined products, but they still have to be broken down. And for a diabetic, a piece of stone ground whole wheat bread from the Garden of Eden or wherever you might get it will still cause you a problem with carbohydrate and insulin response. So it's not the case. The thing, I know some diabetics, I know plenty of diabetics, the steel cut oatmeal, which is, great complex carb, it spikes their insulin as if they had a plate of brownies. Okay, so please understand, an apple, okay, to a person who's insulin resistant, carbohydrate sensitive, is like eating candy. Unfortunately, that's a tough concept, but it's true because metabolically, chemically, it is the same. It breaks down into the same thing. Okay, glucose has to be controlled by what? Insulin. Insulin is what? Bad. It's a hibernation storage hormone. It tells you not to release energy. Okay, let's stay away from that. Okay, then please understand insulin. And again, I go over this stuff in my book on a real simple level, but you have to understand that. This is chemistry. I didn't invent it. I don't sell it. I understand it, and I know how to interpret it for people's benefits, including my own.
And yeah, and for people that don't know you, I was really honestly thinking you were much younger, but you're 72 years old, and so I think that's a testament to you practice what you preach, and that's good to know. Do you think you're gonna make it to 100?
I don't think about that. I just think that I'm more concerned with health span than lifespan,
Sure.
and I'm working on a number of projects for that benefit. Yeah, if I'm 100 and I'm drooling into a bucket and I have a blanket over me, I'm not looking forward to that. If I'm 90 and I can still, do my exercise and play golf and, enjoy myself and my mind is reasonably sharp, that's cool. So, yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, I can't think like that. I mean, I'm at the age now where I'm at a high risk because of my age for all kinds of stuff, but I don't think that metabolically I am, but maybe I'm delusional, and that's, that's possible.
Dr. Ben, speaking of risk, can any advice out there for people, since we're bombarded by from CNN and all of the other stations, the constant negative news, the constant crisis news, and COVID, and we all know that it's out there and we have to be careful. But what advice can we give people who want to, be proactive and get healthy, not just for this, but for?
Okay, I mean, again, the example I give is you see all these athletes that are testing positive for COVID. Almost none of them have symptoms, and almost none, to my knowledge, have really serious repercussions. Okay, why? Because their immune system is strong. Okay, if your immune system is strong, you're going to ward off pathogens. You're going to have a reduced negative response. The people that are compromised have metabolic disease, and those people are more likely to die or have serious complications, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, things like that. These people are compromised. So you want to keep your immune system strong. And this one factor, again, I'd say that this to me is one of the most significant statistical applications I can provide people. 2007, Ruiz and Blair, thousands of subjects, okay? They correlated different factors with longevity. The number one singular correlative to longevity is muscle strength. If you're in the top third for your age and gender in muscle strength, you are 35% less likely to die of cancer and 40% more likely to live to be 100. Not obesity, not diabetes, muscle strength. Why is that? Because if the muscle system is strong, all of the support systems, cardiovascular, cardiorespiratory, hormonal system, nervous system, have to be functioning at a high level to maintain that level of strength. That's a fact. That's a landmark study. So stay strong. And we know that now, even with Alzheimer's, it's not aerobic exercise, high intensity, muscle strength, muscle training, strength training. Why? Because metabolically, the pathways that are generated are conducive to retaining high levels of health and resisting the degradation of ill health.
Everybody, we just got our money's worth for your admission price right there. That's so vitally important. So please share this out. If you're listening to this, share this with your doctor, share this with your favorite health practitioner, and that's awesome to know. So, Dr. Ben, I want to be respectful of your time, and I know you've got a workout waiting for you, and I've got to get my son in the bathtub pretty soon. He's 4 years old, although he looks like he's 5 or 6. I'm afraid when he gets 10, he's going to be bigger than me. So, any parting ideas or anything that I'm just looking over my notes here? We rapidly covered most of what we've talked about before, and added new things. And well, here's one I could throw in there just as a colorful note. I know you worked with a lot of some Hollywood people and some athletes and people like Arthur Jones, who created Nautilus. And can you share any anecdote from all of your years with that would about from behind the scenes, anything about anyone you worked with, not to violate anyone's privacy, but just something funny about that?
Well, I can tell you, I can impart some wisdom, and it's a little parable that Arthur told me. And I said, Arthur, this stuff is so good and so beneficial. Why don't more people do it? Why don't more people use a low carbohydrate approach or high intensity exercise? He told me a story about an old man at the side of a road, a dirt road. You're passing by, and he's got a big pile of dirt next to him, and his knees are bleeding and his fingers are bleeding because he's digging this hole with his fingers, okay? So he said, you walk to your trunk of your car and you take a pick and a shovel out, brand new, and you give it to the guy, and you think you are his savior. And you walk back to your car and he hits you over the back of the head with the shovel. So what happened? Well, what he's done is he's shown this guy the error of his ways and how much time he's wasted, and he can't handle it. So when we're trying to change behaviors of people, why are they resistant? Because they've been digging a hole with their fingers. We give them a better tool. They don't want to accept that. It's hard for people to change something they have so much investment in with regard to time and behavior. So understand, try to be open-minded, try to understand that there could be a better way, and hopefully it'll help you live a healthier, happier, more pleasant life.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for remembering that and sharing that. And that's from many. How long ago did Arthur Jones tell you that story?
Oh, God, 50 years ago, almost 50.
Wow. Well, we can see your mind and your memory are functioning well, sir. So I want to keep, and you've got 20 years on me, and so I want to be where you are. So this has been amazing. So, Dr. Ben, I want to just once again, thanks so much for your time. I think this is a good point to wrap it up. And for anyone out there who wants to find Dr. Ben online, we're going to put everything in the show notes here. This will be on YouTube, as well as it'll be on our Instagram, our Twitter, our Facebook, and we'll get it out to the world.
No, I appreciate it. Now, everybody stay well.
Yeah, absolutely. And have a great workout. What's you're going to go from largest muscle groups to the
Yeah,
smallest?
I do the same exact workout that's in my book, and I haven't changed my workout for 50 years. The people ask me how come. I said because I have the same muscles with the same functions I had 50 years ago, and it's working. So I'm there doing it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, once again, hats off and thank you so much, sir. We'll be in touch and look forward to staying to talking more in the future.
All right. Well, stay well. I thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, you too. Thank you.
Okay.